welcome to members of the council, to members of staff, both in the room here with us and joining us over the internet, and welcome to anybody from the members of the public or otherwise who are also dialing in as well. I'm Andrew Garrett. I'm the chair of the Audit Committee, for those who don't know me. I'm assured that the planned fire drill that we had at 9:30 is the only one for today. So if you do hear the fire alarm go, follow the fire procedure, which I'm sure everyone in this room is aware of. I also would just remind you that the meeting is recorded. So do bear in mind what you say and make sure it's polite, courteous, intelligent, and occasionally humorous as well, I would hope. So, first things first, I have had apologies from Councillor Lilly, who has been formally deputised by Councillor Jones-Evans. Welcome. I have an apology from Councillor Redrup, who left a message with me this morning that he is unwell. I'm aware that from noises off, that's those of you who are dialing in, if you might think just to check that your mics are on mute, that would be helpful. Thank you. Councillor Price, welcome as well. So I think that covers the apology side of things. The leader of the council, who may have attended, isn't attending today. But of course, we do have the deputy leader as a member of our committee. So, first thing on our formal agenda, the minutes of the last meeting. For those of you who were present last time, are there any corrections that you would wish to see made? Otherwise, can we agree that they are an appropriate and correct record of that meeting? I'll put that to committee. Those who agree that they are, just raise your hands. Thank you. I will take those as agreed. If you take me a moment, I need to initial every page, don't you? At the top. Yeah. Sit and sign. I give those to you. Thank you. Next item, item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interests from members? I take it from the shakes of head that there are none, so we'll move on. Public question time. I've been told that there is no question from the public, so that's something I'm going to seek, and under my chairmanship, to try to get at least one question coming to us in the coming year. So, which moves us then to item 4, the reports of the external auditor. Our external auditor representatives are joining us online. They are Helen Thompson, Jack Dunkley, and Jason Jones. Welcome. Members, you've got the reports before you. I'm sure you have read them diligently, but I'll just invite Ernst & Young to say a few words and just to inquire of them. Is there anything that we particularly need to resolve today? I see there may be things that we have to assure you that there are no changes or otherwise.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, members. So in terms of any specific actions for today, for reasons that will become clear, there aren't any for today, and we will set out a combination between this item and I believe the following item on the statement of accounts. It will become clear as to why. As you say, we're going to assume that you have read the reports, but in terms of a brief introduction and overview, starting with the council, my proposal is that we deal with the council report, pause and take questions on that before we move on to the pension fund, if that's all right with you, Chairman.
That's fine with me, yes.
Good. So for the council then, our work is in progress, and I would say in the more straightforward areas of the audit, that's now complete, subject to the review of all of those procedures. This year has been complicated. in part because we actually started the audit later than we ordinarily would, as part of the catching up from last year, where obviously we were working to later deadlines. And there have been issues that have arisen towards sort of in the last 6 weeks or so, which are impacting on our ability to complete. So in particular, we talk about ISA 540. So that's the International Standard of Auditing number 540, which is all about auditing accounting estimates. And we briefly set that out in the executive summary section, and it's one of the areas that we've had to take into account this year. So the auditing standard isn't new, but it has been revised. And those revisions have effectively increased the level of work that auditors are required to do when looking at the methods and the models and the assumptions used in reaching the accounting entry in the financial statements. We know it is going to be an area of focus for our regulator, the Financial Reporting Council, and therefore it is an area, and it has been an area of focus for a number of years. And Jason will provide an update in a moment against each of the risk areas, but the two where we still have a significant amount of work to complete are both linked to accounting estimates, and that's the property, plant and equipment investment property valuation, where there are ongoing discussions and work going on around finalising our assessment over the values that have been disclosed in the financial statements. And then more pertinently, I think there's an issue around the pension liability, where there was a national issue that was identified by another auditing firm that came to our attention in late August. And effectively, in this particular area, we rely on the work of the actuary to the pension fund. And in previous years, we've effectively audited the inputs that go into the model, we audit the outputs that come out from the model, and we rely on PwC, which is commissioned by the National Audit Office on behalf of all firms to look at the work of the actuary. When you look at the newer auditing standard, the requirements are much more stringent about what we do effectively in the black box in the middle, so how the actuary actually calculates the estimate. And that is something that we have been considering how we get to the best level of assurance over. So that's something all firms have had to think about this year, and has put some pressure on timetables in almost all cases, I would say. The other areas of outstanding work that were set out on page 16 of your papers have moved on, and Jason will provide a bit of an update on that. In terms of the value for money assessment, members, I hope, will recall from the last meeting that we said that the work that we are required to do this year has changed. So we no longer give a value for money conclusion as part of our audit report. We would report by exception if we had any concerns over the proper arrangements that the council have in place. At the last meeting, we reported that we had identified no areas of significant weakness. So there's nothing that impacts the audit report. Instead, our findings against the 3 areas of focus for value for money will be reported in the annual auditor's report, which we intend to bring to the December meeting. The final point I'd like to say just before I hand over to Jason is that there is one other area of work that we are required to complete around the whole of government accounts. So this is where we do work on behalf of the National Audit Office on the summarisation schedules, effectively, that take your financial statements and turn them into another format that is then used by government to create this whole of government accounts position statement. HM Treasury has not yet issued their instructions to councils about this year's process. Therefore, the NAO hasn't issued its group in audit instructions to us as your auditors, and we're not expecting that until probably December at the earliest. Whilst the Isle of Wight Council will almost certainly continue to fall below the threshold for full audit procedures, we have to wait for the group audit instructions in case there is something specific that the NAO asks us to do. This doesn't impact giving the financial statements audit opinion as such, but it does impact our ability to close down the audit and certify it as closed. So at this point, I'm just going to ask Jason to update on the list of outstanding work and also just briefly summarise what we have done in each of the risk areas that we included in our audit plan.
Thanks, Helen, and morning, Chair, and morning, everyone. Chair, I'll take members through the update on the status of the audit. So if members could please turn to page 16 of our report. Since drafting our report, we've made some further progress in the sections highlighted there. And in terms of the first one on property valuations, Helen's touched on that, and we're expecting our draft report from our property team by the end of next week. We've sent them a sample of assets to review. On the additions and disposals, that's now largely complete. There is an adjustment that management is in the process of making relating to a derecognition of a voluntary controlled school, which the council removed or disposed of from its asset register, but that needed to be brought back into the accounts. We do give further details in section 2 and section 4 of our report. There is also, in terms of the additions and disposals, one query also with our property team, and that will be part of their draft report, which we're expecting at the end of next week, Chair. On the PFI accounting, that's now complete. Investments, borrowings, and cash. There's 4 external confirmations that we're still waiting on, but the work is completed. Provisions is also complete. Helen's touched on the pensions, so that's obviously still in progress. Operating expenditure and payroll testing is complete on both of those areas. There's just a few queries with management, which we're waiting on the responses for. Journal testing is completed. Going concern cash flow forecast we received last week, so we're currently working through those and the updated disclosures. Yeah, so that's the progress since we've drafted the report. And then I'd also like to ask members if they could then turn to section 2, starting on page 22 of the pack, Chair. In this section, we report back to the committee on the risks we identified in our audit plan, which we presented to the July committee. So some of the areas are still in progress, but we just wanted to give the committee an update of the work performed to date to address each of the risks that we identified. And these are the same risks communicated to the July committee, but now we're just giving an update on the work that we've performed to address the risks. The first one we have is the misstatements due to fraud or error. And we respond to this risk on every audit engagement. We've completed the journals testing, and we've not identified any inappropriate transactions or any management override of controls, but we're still working on the accounting estimates relating to property valuations and pensions. We're also working on the related party transactions at the moment, and this is just to identify if there have been any significant unusual transactions, but we've not identified any to date. Then the next one down on page 23 is inappropriate capitalization of revenue expenditure. Testing is now completed, and we've not identified any instances where revenue expenditure was classified as capital. We also checked further any journals moving expenditure to capital codes, but there were no errors or misstatements identified. Then if we could move to page 25, property valuations. Again, Helen's touched on this. We've not identified any issues to date, but there is a sample of properties that's with our property team, and they're having doing their own review of those, and they will then report back to us by the end of next week. Members will notice we separated out the valuation of council properties valued at depreciated replacement cost. That's on page 27. The reason for that is because the risk in terms of the valuations is lower than investment properties and properties valued at existing use valuation, as those valuation methods rely more on market data. We have identified one issue to date. That's the one I mentioned earlier on the derecognition of a school, which management needs to bring back into the account. So they just need to reverse that transaction because It was in relation to ownership that had transferred in previous years, and management therefore took it out of the asset register of the council. But even though ownership has transferred, because it's a voluntary control school, for accounting purposes, the school is still controlled by the council, and so that needed to be brought back into the asset register, and management is in the process of doing that, Chair. The next one down is PFI. So the council has one PFI arrangement that's material to the audit. That's the highways PFI. Work is complete and there were no issues identified. The council does use an accounting model to account for this arrangement, and we've agreed all the entries back to the accounting model and no issues were identified. Next one down is pensions. Again, we've touched on the pensions, but other than the issue that Helen's mentioned, we've not identified any other issues in the work that we've done so far. But work is still ongoing. Going concern, work is ongoing as well. We've recently received management's cash flow forecast, so we're working through those and also the updated disclosures. So that's currently still in progress. And then the last one on section 2 is COVID-19 grants. Members may recall in the previous meeting, we mentioned that due to the volume of COVID-19 grants received this year, we recognize a risk that the council could incorrectly account for some of these grants, specifically the agent-principal relationship, which requires different accounting treatments. And some of the conditions might not be as clear as to whether the council should treat the grant as principal, which requires full recognition in the council's accounts, or an agent relationship, which would just require disclosure rather than recognizing anything in the council's income and expenditure. So the work is largely complete. We have a few queries with management at the moment, but there is only one item that we raised so far in relation to the infection control grant, which we queried this treatment with management, and fortunately at that point in time, the draft accounts weren't submitted yet. So management had initially planned to account for that specific grant as 80% agent and 20% principal, but we felt that it was fully a principal arrangement and council need to recognize the grant fully in the accounts. But as I just mentioned, at that point in time, the draft accounts hadn't been submitted yet, so management was able to do the adjustments before actually submitting the draft accounts for audit. Chair, that's all I was going to go through, but happy to take any questions or hand back.
Well, thank you to both of you for that introduction. That obviously it's one of the most important pieces of work that this committee will do is receiving these reports and considering them. So it's important we take our time. Colleagues, do you have questions on this paper? Councillor John.
Just a quick one, if I may.
Your mic, I think. It should be red.
I'm red now.
Chair, I'm not hearing anything. I'm not sure if that's the same for everyone else online.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Maybe it was still booting part 2. The way that we've dealt with the assets, the mainland assets, the investments, is using the existing use value calculation. And clearly there's a difference probably between that, or I suggest there is, between that and the market realisable value if we were to dispose of that asset. I wonder if you could comment on the two ways of calculating that. One would be a market disposal value of the asset, and the other based on the existing use, which is on the presumably based on the rental income from it.
Shall I, Jason, if I start with that one? I believe when you're referring to mainland property assets, you're referencing the investment property assets. Those are valued at fair value, and so they are valued each year at the 31st of March at fair value, which means it's at the market value in terms of what would it be worth if it was sold at that point in time. Existing use value assets are largely sitting within your operational property, plant and equipment, and that would be at the existing use value. Jason, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, and just to add on the existing use value, so that would be based on an income approach and a yield based on the risk of that income to the council. So yes, to the member's point, it does include the income for those particular assets, what the council expects the income to be over future years.
Councillor Jarman, do you want to follow through on that? You have a puzzled look upon your face. Oh, you've got what you needed. Puzzled is cogitating. Colleagues, other questions? Is Councillor Bacon?
Thank you, Chair. It's an issue that's been mentioned a couple of times. It's page 27 in our papers, which I think is page 17 of the report. It is this issue about the voluntary controlled primary school and its transfer. I just wondered if that's an unusual sort of error. Was it something you were surprised to see happen? And also, you don't comment on the impact or effect of that error and the fact that it's a change has got to be made. I wonder if you can just comment on those 2 points.
Yeah, sure, Chair, I can comment, and then I'm not sure if the council might want to come in there as well. It wasn't an isolated error. I think it was just oversight. It's a transaction that occurred a few years ago, and as through the close down process, the council identified this property that was previously transferred, but because it was a voluntary controlled school, for accounting purposes, the council is still deemed to control the school and therefore shouldn't have been removed from the asset register. So council recognized that when we queried it and have agreed to reverse the transaction in the accounts. And then the second question, the impact. There is no impact on the sort of the reserves, general fund, council tax impact. That all gets reversed out. So I'm not sure if the council wants to add anything to that, or correct me if I've said anything wrong.
Councillor Bacon,
I've no follow-up. Was there any other comment?
okay. Andrew Carpenter, sorry, I missed that.
I was just going to reinforce what Jason said. It was an error that was made, I must admit, on my behalf. But as soon as we realised we made the error, we agreed immediately to rectify it in what will become the final version of the statement. So, as Jason has already said, there's no impact on the general fund or the reserves of the council. It's purely an accounting adjustment that we need to make, which we're more than willing to do. Thank you.
Councillor Bacon, do you want to?
And there was one other question, separate matter, page 30 in our bundle, which is page 20 in the report. It was the findings and conclusions in respect of the going concern issue. Again, there's just a bit of a flag waving in that information was not received in relation to the going concern point, and I think it said that there's still some information awaited. Again, I just wondered what is the impact of that? Is that possibly a source for greater concern.
If I might take that one, I don't think, Councillor, that you need to be concerned by this. Going concern in local government is not really an issue as to whether or not the council is a going concern, because the way in which the public sector operates is that you are assumed to be a going concern unless the government effectively tells you that you are not. However, there has been an increased focus on going concern disclosures in the public sector over the past year or so, largely due to the changes in the auditing standard around going concern, which was another one that had some revisions that took impact from this year. So as Jason said, I think in his introduction, we have now received the supporting information that we were waiting for. To be fair to officers, there was always some doubt as to whether or not we would complete our audit by the 30th of September. The going concern period has to be 12 months from the period at which the accounts are signed. Therefore, in terms of if we are to sign the accounts, as is looking now most likely after the December audit committee meeting, then the going concern assessment period is through to December 2022. Therefore, there was in some ways a logic in waiting to understand what information we were going to require. It is an area that was significantly different last year in terms of the disclosures in the financial statements. So we're not concerned. It is a case of just working through the right information over the right period. I don't know if either Jason or Andrew would want to add to that comment.
No, that's nothing to add to that, Dylan.
Thank you for that. Councillor Chalmers.
So with the delay and needing to go through to the end of the next calendar year, that will invariably take us into the 22-23 year, for which the budget will only be defined in February. Is that an issue?
Councillor, no, it's not an issue because we would focus on your medium-term financial plans.
Right, one more question, if I may, going back to Councillor Bacon's question on page 27. The net loss and the principal loss figures which are quoted in here are quite large sums. And I wondered if that gave you any cause for concern about the valuation of other assets.
Chair, no, there wasn't any concern as we mentioned previously. This was an oversight by the council's finance team, and as soon as they recognized it, they agreed to reverse the transaction. So the 9 million in there, the 5 million forms part of the 9 million, but the difference we had no particular issues with how the other disposals were accounted for, but we have referred one of the items to our property team just to make sure that the treatment is appropriate, and that's what we're waiting for them to come back on by the end of next week in their draft report.
Thank you. It seems a very large net loss in terms of the valuation of an asset. That was all. Thank you.
Colleagues, any other questions from you on this one? There's a second part, of course, to this item, isn't there? But at this point, may I ask, there are a couple of places, it may have been on another paper, but there were inquiries were to be made of the audit committee. I think at the top, Helen, you said that you wouldn't need to make those formal inquiries as of today, but presumably at some point we as a committee have to respond to you to say that we have no further concerns or something like that. If I've got that right, is that the case? There's nothing that we need to formally resolve today for you on this item?
I believe that's the case. I believe we've had the assurances from yourself or from those charged with governance for the year that has completed. The last element is the letter of management representation, which is signed by management but is discussed at the audit committee and you effectively affirm that you agree with the contents of the management representation letter. We can't really do that until we've completed the outstanding work so that we can confirm whether there are, for example, any unadjusted audit differences that you need to consider as a committee. And that paper will come back to you. So we will update this report and update the letter of management representation, and that will come back in December. I think, Jason, I'm right in saying we've had the other assurance letters.
Just the one from those charged with governance we are
so-
still waiting for, but we've got from management and internal audit. But the council is aware of that.
Okay, thank you. In that case, I think we could, Councillor Jarman wants one more.
Sorry to keep butting in here. So if I can move forward now to page 47, give everybody a time to flick a little bit. There seems to be effectively, I'll call it a disputed sum, which is mentioned of a recurring of about 41,000 each year for the last 3 years. I wonder if you could update us on the status of that discussion. It seems to indicate it's gone for effectively arbitration. Is that correct?
Not exactly. I wouldn't use those words, Councillor. So the way in which audit fees are set, public sector audit appointments, or PSAA as an abbreviation, set the scale fees for the audit. And that is the number at the top of that table, so the 98,602. As I've discussed probably in previous meetings, but I'm well aware that a number of members are very new and so won't have been party to these discussions. The public sector audit profession has been under significant pressure in terms of fees, so the fees have reduced by a considerable amount over a period of time, and over that same period of time, the level of scrutiny that auditors are under from their regulator or our regulator has increased. So effectively you've had fees going downwards, pressure on fees going upwards, and it really came to a head in 2019-20 when, as a firm, we stepped back and said, what would it cost us if we were costing the audit properly rather than relying on PSAA fees? And then that's what generated the recurrent fee variation of 41,000 that you reference on page 47. The way in which changes to scale fees are determined is that in the first case, in the first instance, we would discuss additional fees with the council and either agree or disagree on whether that fee is appropriate. And then secondly, it always goes to PSAA for determination. So it's not an arbitration process, it is a determination process. If we look specifically at page 47 of your papers, the final fee column, which is the furthest one on the right, the scale fee is that of 98,000, is that set by PSAA. The 41,000 is the amount I've just talked about. And then there is a further risk-based fee variation of 34,799. So that is for the work, the additional work that we incurred last year, and that value was approved by Chris Ward as the Section 151 officer. However, it has now been with PSAA for 6 to 8 months, 8 months probably now at this stage, for them to consider whether or not they will agree that fee. So it's not really disputed fees, it's just the complicated way in which fees are both set and then agreed within the public sector, and nothing for the council to worry about necessarily, so it's not that we're in dispute.
Thank you for that, colleagues. If there are no other questions on this part of item 4, we can move on to 4B, I believe, now.
Thank you, Chairman. So turning to the pension fund, we're in a better position here. So the work is largely complete, subject to final review, and then the procedures that we always carry out as we approach the end of the audit. However, as we have been talking about the council's audit and the delays, particularly caused by the additional work that we are doing around auditing accounting estimates, this does impact on the completion of the pension fund audit, because effectively we sign the pension fund and the council statements and they are issued all at the same time. So any Any delay in the council also impacts on the pension fund. Jack will take you through the outstanding work and give you an update on that of the information on page 64 of your pack, and also the risks, and then we'll obviously take any questions on this particular report. So Jack, if I can hand over to you.
Yep, thanks, Helen. So just to update the committee on the status of the audit, as Helen said, it's on page 64. So on there, we listed that our work on disclosures was still ongoing. So just to update the committee, we've now completed that work. And the rest of the items listed on that page are really our wrap-up procedures. So the audit is substantially complete. Then to move on to our work on to talk you through the work we've completed on our significant risks, which start on page 68 of the reporting pack. So our first significant risk is the risk of misstatement due to fraud or error. That's a risk that we're required to recognise as part of ISO 240. And ISO 240 sets out the procedures we need to perform in response to that risk. So it's primarily looking at our journal entry testing, reviewing significant estimates, and reviewing any significant or unusual items. We've completed all the work in that area and have no errors or issues to report back to you. ISO 240 also requires us to consider where we think fraud is most likely to occur in the financial statements. So for a pension fund, where we think that would be is in the overstatement of investment assets. So to respond to that risk, we perform a reconciliation between the fund manager's report, the custodian's report, and the financial statements. Again, we've completed that reconciliation and have no issues or errors to identify that we need to report back to you. Our next significant risk is then down on the next page, and this relates to the valuation of complex investments. So this is really to recognise the risk that the pension fund invested in private debt for the first time this year, which is just inherently more complex to value. So where that investment was made fairly close to the year-end date, our audit procedures really focus on agreeing that initial investment through to the bank statement to check that value, and then performing an analytical review between that investment date and the year-end date. And again, we've completed that analytical review, and the valuation came in within our range based on the indices that we applied to that initial investment. So again, have no issues or errors to report back to you. And then the last area of audit focus is again on the disclosure of going concern. So very much in a similar vein to the council. The focus is really just checking the adequacy of that disclosure in light of the changing environment we're all still operating in because of the impact of COVID-19. And again, we've completed all the procedures that we've listed in that area and have no issues or errors to report back to you. So yeah, that was it in terms of what I wanted to talk through, and kind of happy to take any questions.
Colleagues, questions on this item? There are none, which is great. So I think that we conclude item 4 at this stage, unless somebody needs to tell me I should be doing something. We, as a committee, note the reports. Thank you for the work that you're doing so far on that, and look forward to the conclusion of all of this. It sounds like December is going to be a pretty heavy meeting in some respects, so I look forward to that. But thank you for your attendance, thank you for your work, and we will then move on.
Thank you, Chairman.
So the next item is a verbal update on the statement of accounts from Director of Finance, Section 151 Officer. I think Kerry Hubbleday, you're deputising for Chris Ward on this, is that right?
Correct, thank you. Okay, this is a really brief statement because it's simply just to reaffirm what you have heard from our external auditors. So I just wanted to confirm for the committee that in the circumstances of a delay in being able to sign off the statement of accounts, we wanted to confirm to you that all of the work relating to the production of the statement has been completed by the finance team. And you will recall that the draft results, as they impact on the council's revenue position, have recently been reported to Cabinet within the quarterly performance report. So I just wanted to reaffirm what you've already heard this morning, that we will therefore be bringing you the final statement of accounts for the committee sign-off at the Audit Committee in December, following the conclusion of the audit work by our external audit partners. And that's simply it for now.
Thank you for that. Any questions from colleagues at this moment in time? There are no questions, which maybe relieves you, or surprises you, but you can let me know otherwise, in which case we can move on at this stage to item 6, which is the annual governance statement. That's at pages 95 in the pack and onwards. So I will assume members have read where they are able to the report. I'll getting there myself just to make sure that's what we have to do. Is there anything that members, staff, officers you want to add at this stage before we get into questioning and comment? The Assistant Chief Executive, Wendy.
Thank you, Chair. It's very kind. I'm conscious that many members on audit are new members, so it's just to provide reassurance that the annual governance statement is something that we do produce on an annual basis. It's possibly not the most exciting read in the world. It is something that forms part of our final statement of accounts, but sits separately in that it is separately signed off, subject to this committee's confirmation that they are happy with it by the leader of the council and the chief exec, and will not be impacted by the delay in the financial element of the statement of accounts. So it can be signed as an accurate reflection of the 2021 calendar year. I think the only point I would raise is that it is considered by Ernst & Young as part of the background work that they do on their audit of the accounts, and members will note that in their report to you under the other reporting issues, they have referenced the report and the fact that this is consistent with their knowledge of the council in terms of the governance arrangements that are in place, and therefore they have no matters to report as a result of the content of the annual governance statement. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think the observation I would make, and this is tidying up perhaps statements, I believe I raised it at the last meeting, that references to the scrutiny side of our work are not, let us say, as accurate as they might be, references to panels rather than committees and the names thereof, and at one point there is a reference to an overview on scrutiny, which is, of course, is our legislative function, but isn't what the committee is called. And I think there's a few things to tweak there. But colleagues, other comments or questions on this paper? Councillor Stevens.
I just want some clarification. Page 109, adaptations were implemented through the Silver and Gold command groups to reflect new ways of working and emergency arrangements. Who and what are the Silver and Gold command groups is my question.
Chair, if I may. This relates to the arrangements that we have in place through our local resilience forums, so that when an emergency situation arises, operationally, Gold Command and Silver Command are put in place to manage a situation on the ground. So Gold Command for the Isle of Wight Council is the Chief Executive, and Silver Command will depend on the nature of the emergency being dealt with, but ranges across the directors and senior managers of the Isle of Wight Council. And they are responsible for the day-to-day operational arrangements for managing emergencies on the island.
And who scrutinises their decisions on the operational areas that they go into? Is there any elected member input, or is there an independent review body that looks at decisions made and outcomes?
Thank you, Chair. The The arrangements that are in place, there is always a final report on the outcome of an emergency situation that goes in two ways. It goes through the Local Resilience Forum, but it would also come to Corporate Scrutiny Committee in terms of looking at how the council managed a situation. So you may remember that both Corporate Scrutiny and Cabinet have had reports in the recent year on the way in which the council has handled the COVID pandemic. And so that is how locally, how we would put that overview and scrutiny in place.
And that's certainly the case. I was chair of corporate scrutiny at the time. I'd also add that the chief executive, on my request, provided me with confidential sight of records relating to the work of the Gold Command Group as well. And I was looking at that subsequently informed my understanding when it came to the public side of reporting. So I think that's an important thing, and that from the scrutiny side of things there, although that's a whole other part of this council's function, that there is a means by which, other than the public side of things, that certainly the corporate scrutiny chair and perhaps other members, indeed a former member of the council, Councillor Merwell of the time, also looked at those as well. So I would be satisfied, yes. What I would say, though, and I did pick up the same thing that Councillor Stevens has, that it is, in terms of being a public-facing document, it would be helpful to perhaps a little more explanation around what Gold and Silver Command groups mean. Colleagues, other questions on this statement? If I may, then, I'll first pick up one on page 108 of the pack, the reference, third bullet point down on the page, but second of principle 6, references to councillor boards. Are we sure, confident that we publish who is a member of those boards, and that we're doing everything that we can where appropriate to make public any minutes of those meetings, which are outside of the normal kind of very formal side of the council's work, the committee side, which we do have to publish. But does my question make sense, first of all? Because from looking at from the outside, a member of the public might reasonably ask, what are these boards? Where do I find a list of them? Who is their membership? And where it is appropriate, where can I read their minutes, their terms of reference and their minutes? Are we publishing those appropriately?
Those are not formal boards of the council, nor are they formal decision-making boards. And at the moment, as an informal arrangement, they would not be published, although, of course, minutes are available under FOI should anybody request. If Audit Committee considers that it would be appropriate for the council to look at where it has those boards in place, and at least outlining formal boards exist and who is on them, then that is something that we could look to do through our ongoing sort of continuous improvement for governance and performance management of the council. I
certainly would. I saw Councillor Jarman nodding there as well. I think in the interests of transparency, and certainly the administration, as they laid out transparency as one of its key principles, it's there for them to bring push that forwards, but I think that would be a sensible way. I don't think it hurts to almost go overboard on explaining where we can and providing information. So, and if I remember rightly, a key performance indicator of the council is the number of FOI requests, and by reducing that number, by being transparent, if that's possible, then that services that KPI as well as our responsibilities to the public. Colleagues, any Councillor James Evans.
Thank you, Chair. It's quite a specific question. It might need an answer later on, but just looking on page 113, where the internal audit team undertook assurance across 11 grants. I was just wondering if that included last summer's grants, which I think was from the Department of Transport regarding making our streets safe for COVID. and included the money that we received to do the works in Newport High Street, for instance, all of the red barriers and so on, which I understood was supposed to be going across the island at the time. But I just wondered, what was that grant, which I think was a bit difficult to administer, and also will the Welcome Back Fund be part of that ongoing Lucas work? Thank you.
Who's got that one?
I think Lizzie would probably get asking that.
So the Chief Internal Auditor.
Good morning,
Lizzie.
all.
Good morning.
Councillor Jones-Evans, if you don't mind, I will double check the title of the specific grant. There were multiple grants last year. Not all of them require audit to get involved. There were some, though, that we did get involved in, but I would need to check the specific name. Unfortunately, there were so many and they vary slightly. So could you repeat, please, the name, and I will look up to see what we did cover and be able to answer probably by the time I come to present regarding our report.
Thank you, Liz. So mainly the assistance of our deputy chief, the chief executive, Wendy Pereira, because I think it was under active travel. I see it was quite complex, wasn't it? But hopefully Wendy's got the exact answer.
If I may, Chair, I can't off the top of my head remember the exact reference of the name of the grant. It was particularly confusing in terms of its name, but Lizzie, if you don't mind, we will confirm for you, and then hopefully you will be able to confirm for committee and the chair as to the exact nature of whether you did the audit or not.
Thank you. Colleagues, any other questions or comments on this? So we've made some suggestions, of course, for rewording. Is that something that can happen? We can still give you the resolution that you would require today, subject to revisions. So I'll put that. What is it we formally need to remind me of the option that we accept? Is it accepting? To agree the content of the draft annual government statement 2020 to 21, subject to revisions in explaining the functions of the scrutiny completely, and the gold and silver commands additional detail. Councillor Jones-Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry not to draw this out any further, but I was just, so all these action points, things that we're going to be addressing, will these be brought to the audit committee on a quarterly basis? We're nodding, yeah, rather than annual, because it's an annual statement, isn't it? So I was just looking for those updates. That's okay. Lots of nods, that's fine. Yeah.
Useful to clarify, and certainly there are nods to my right. So it's an ongoing process for us as an audit committee. Okay, but otherwise, as I've set out, colleagues, are you happy to agree that? I'll just ask for a formal show of hands. Those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you. I look forward to seeing the final revised one. A couple of typos I will just pick up with you as well, but I don't think a committee needs to get too fussed about the misplacement of a colon or something. Sounds very medical. So that moves us on to item 7, the Commercial Acquisition Strategy Progress Report. We have a report from the Director of Regeneration. Mr. Martin, no, not Mr. Martin. I was looking for Director of Regeneration, but he's not there. Is he up there? Oh, Graham. Okay, sorry. I'm still getting used to this hybrid nature of things. Is there anything you would wish to add to this report? Would take it that the members of the committee have read the papers, but anything you particularly wish to add?
Thank you, Chairman. And good morning, everyone. The report is quite a straightforward one. It updates everyone on how the council's properties on the mainland are doing. And as you will have read, things are going well and probably better than might have been expected in such uncertain times. A particular difference to note is that Portsmouth Council's role in the investment strategy has now ended as we move into more of a management phase, and property services at the Isle of Wight Council are now managing the portfolio entirely. And that's why this is the first time this report is being presented by us and not Portsmouth. My colleague Paul Hargreaves oversees a portfolio on a day-to-day basis, and Paul and I are both here today, and we're happy to take any questions anyone might have. Thank you.
I already know there are a number of questions, so which of my colleagues, Councillor Jones-Evans, do you wish to start?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm not going to hog all the questions. I'm sure lots of members have got questions on this. I suppose the biggest one, I suppose, really is stemming from a political decision that was taken back in 2017, really, and now it's about realigning that with the alliances. It's actually one of our 50 aims will be coming forward for hopefully bringing some investment back to the Isle of Wight. But in that context, this report talks about it being a great opportunity in the new sort of world, sort of growing, coming out of COVID world, for industrial estates and for areas where storage units and so on, because of the effects of Brexit and having to get goods around the country in a expedient manner. So I just sort of was just musing on the fact that we've got our own Nicholson Road, which is very important. Strategic, has been for many years, project, regen project, which has got its planning permission, but yet we need some investment to take it through to its next stage and to get all of our that investment going. So really, I suppose it's a question is, why aren't we bringing back investment to the island so we can take advantage of this new world with this? So that's my sort of first approach, maybe a more philosophical one. But going back to the why there's a resource issue here has been flagged up, that our own property team, as Graham's just said, has been brought back. So it cost us £60,000 the last financial year to Portsmouth City Council. And I'm guessing, was it brought in-house? Was that just for a budget saving? Was that offered up as a budget saving, or was it literally because we can do it now easily because we're now in the project management phase? But it does say there's a risk that because we are doing it ourselves, then we can't deliver other priorities. So I'd just like some really sort of clarification around that please, if that's possible.
Is that a question for myself?
Anyone who wants to answer it, yeah.
Yes,
that's you, Graham. Yes.
Yeah. As the portfolio, a few things to unpack there, but as the portfolio moves into more of a steady phase where it's more about management rather than progressing the investment strategy and buying new properties, it was right that the portfolio moved back to the Isle of Wight Council so we can manage it more in line with colleagues on the island and progress things. The next question would be around, in terms of potentially selling any of the mainland portfolio and investing further money on the island, I would just say that the island as a place to invest is a very different proposition. It's more about regeneration, and that would involve another stage of an investment strategy, which hasn't been considered in that detail yet. But that is being progressed by Chris Ashman. In terms of resources, Portsmouth were managing a portfolio on behalf of Isle of Wight Council, and bringing it back in-house, we believe we should be able to manage it for less than Portsmouth were charging with the good job that they did. And we hope over the next few years to deliver budget savings in doing that. But at the moment, we're just finding our way as to what this all means. As you can imagine, having come through COVID, all of our project plans were upturned somewhat. And we're now considering how to resource the department to best deliver all of these priorities. And we believe that within the next 6 months, by the next financial year, we will have a firm grip of that. And we do hope to deliver budget savings and also manage a portfolio more actively.
So, and I just remind colleagues that some of the discussion may be more appropriate for scrutiny in terms of pressing around the political side of things.
Because it prefaced with the whole member decision in the report, so obviously it's front and centre. I appreciate that, yeah.
There are certain things where audit, however we feel about something that's happening, our role is to see is it happening properly, and not necessarily a decision that we would ourselves be approving of. Anyway, Councillor Bacon.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Jones-Evans sort of started asking one of the questions I was interested in, and that is the reference in paragraph 11.4 to the consequences of this move of management. I note that the response said that the management now costs less, but that doesn't really deal with the underlying point, which is there's still potential consequences on the deliverability of other priorities. What are those other priorities that might be affected, and what is the impact or the level of that impact?
We don't fully understand the level of that impact because we're still finding our ways. We come out of this phase of COVID and we start rebuilding those priorities, most of which changed as we went in through the pandemic. So we're looking at our resources at the moment with our director, Chris Ashman, so that we can best manage those priorities with the right structure. As you can imagine, recruitment is something that has been quite difficult over the last 18 months, but things are becoming more settled now. So as we start matching our resources to our priorities over the next 6 months, this will become much more clearer. And as part of that, managing a portfolio will be put into that mix. So to give you an example, we have one member of staff, Paul Hargreaves, who has taken a leading role on managing this portfolio day to day. Paul was due to leave the council and we managed to keep him on so that he could take using the money, the budget that came over from Portsmouth, so that he could concentrate on the portfolio. We're now reassessing how to best do that to manage this within property services.
So the statement, well, what prompted putting the statement in at paragraph 11.4? Because is it guesswork then, or was there any underlying thinking to say that led to the statement, this may have consequences for the deliverability of other priorities?
I think it's more about to not flag that risk up. It would be inappropriate not to make mention of that risk. But as we say, we can't bottom out exactly what that risk means for council at the moment, other than we do have it in hand. And over the coming months, we'll have a much clearer picture of how these priorities will be resourced. But I feel it's appropriate that that statement is in there. It wasn't meant to worry anybody. It's just that I'm reading it now. This was brought into existing resources. It is a big amount of work to take on, but it is well in hand.
So it's a very open risk then. It could be low, it could be high, we don't know.
It does certainly impact other priorities. I wouldn't say it will necessarily negatively impact them, but this is something that needs to be factored into the workload of property services and the regeneration directorate. But there are also, to put onto that as well, something which I wish I'd have written now, there are also benefits of this because we're learning more about the mainland portfolio, the valuation of them, and there are clear synergies of managing this in-house, so that we can share that information, knowledge, that experience to do things better on the island, especially Nick Road, which was mentioned earlier. The information and the knowledge that we glean from the mainland portfolio will simply benefit us there.
Chair, I've got a couple of other questions, or I can defer to someone else. Councillor Stevens has indicated, but I will come back to you still. Councillor Stevens, and then it will be Councillor Jones-Evans. Councillor Stevens.
I think, Chair, you're quite right with regards to the role of scrutiny here. And I look at the recommendation. I'd like, obviously, to listen to the questions, and to be quite candid, I've got a few as well. But I think that possibly we're going too much into depth, but I think if scrutiny got hold of it and started to look at this, whether we're doing this management in-house, and we're feeling our way forward when we're talking about millions of pounds investment doesn't really instill me with the confidence that the Isle of Wight Council is going to take this forward and run with it. We've got some good results here so far. I don't want to see that in jeopardy. I'll leave it at that, Chair. But I spent a fair bit of time on these papers this weekend, and to be quite candid, I'm going to leave that because I know that our colleagues in scrutiny will take this forward, and I know for sure that cabinet members will be looking at this again. So thank you.
And it wouldn't be the first time that the Audit Committee and the Corporate Scrutiny Committee communicated formally, certainly when I was the chair of Corporate Scrutiny and former Councillor Tyndall was chair of Audit, we had those kind of formal things. And I will be meeting informally with the current chair of Corporate Scrutiny anyway this week, Councillor Hastings. We've decided to keep those lines of dialogue going and actually improve them so that Audit and Scrutiny can work effectively, doing the two sides of the coin that we do have. So, but it might be helpful to have a formal resolution out of the committee that we note that a request of the scrutiny function that it looks at that. Councillor Jones-Evans, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. So back on page 119, 8.4, there's issues regarding letting Unit 4 and renegotiating a lease on Unit 5 in Aylesford. And I was just wondering what the financial impact of that was, of the failed letting of Unit 4 and the renegotiating team terms, I think with the current tenant. Are the rents going to be going up or down? Because obviously rents across the country have been well, when I say to flux. So that's my first question. And again, it might be a strategic question for you. That's gone under strategy 9.1, Chair. But if this is such a good investment, my question is, why aren't we looking to do more? So I might just leave that hanging.
I think the second question would be, is a much more strategic question, better answered by possibly Claire Shand. The first question on the Access 420 units, I'll hand over to my colleague, Paul Hargreaves, who manages those units with the agents, the managing and the letting agents.
Good morning, everybody. Unit 4 has been vacant since the beginning of this year. It was vacant when it was handed over to us on the 1st of April. We did manage to find a tenant, DCS Logistics, paying a very good rent of £151,000 a year. And they were prepared to take that lease on a full repairing and insuring terms, which basically meant we would have then kept the £119,000 that had been paid to us by the former tenant in a delapse claim. Unfortunately, that deal fell through because they couldn't, at the end of the day, get board approval. The property is therefore still on the market with our managing agents, Caxton's. We have had quite a lot of interest in it, but at the moment, nobody has pulled the trigger on it. One of the questions we may have to ask ourselves is, of the £119,000 that was paid into us by the outgoing tenant, whether we have to spend some of that money on making the unit more attractable. We have up until now tried to avoid doing that, and we almost got away with it. But as I say, we may have to spend some money on the unit. Otherwise, we are likely to find that a tenant will want to come in and take a schedule of condition. And at the end of the next tenant's lease, we will then have to spend some money on the unit. We may be instructing a joint agent at the end of this month. If Caxton's can't find a tenant by the end of September, we will go to a joint agency with a firm called Altus Group. There is high demand in the area, and hopefully we will let the unit certainly before Christmas. The agent is confident of that. In respect of Unit 5, Go Installations, this is a lease renewal that back in March of this year, a deal was on the table. The surveyors, Sibley Perez, who were negotiating it for us, had a deal with the tenant in March, and I think it was about in June we were then notified that the tenant wants to renege on the deal. The tenant is currently paying £45,000 per annum. We are hoping that rent will increase from £45,000 to around £65,000 or £70,000. The question for us is whether we can persuade the tenant to accept it because of the strong case we have, or whether we have to pursue it to court. Pursuing it to court obviously will cost us some money, but we can protect our position by serving what's called a Calder Bank letter, so that we can claim our costs at the end of the day. We're just talking tactically. We were due to have a meeting. Well, we had a meeting last week to talk about it, and the next thing is I've got to instruct the surveyor acting for us what we want him to do. So hopefully we can persuade the tenant to accept 65,000, or it goes to court, or he just says I can't afford it and he vacates. So that's Unit 4 and Unit 5 in Aylesford.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. What was the financial impact? Wait, that was my question actually. Can that be provided?
Sorry.
Yes. Mr. Hargreaves, I think you were about to respond to that.
Well, I was going to say that that's a valuation question, which is outside my area of expertise. So I wouldn't want to stray into an area that I'm not an expert in.
When we say valuation impact, could we be clear on that, please? I'm not sure I fully understand on which area of valuation.
Well, obviously we're not getting income, are we? So if places are empty.
Yeah, from a short-term point of view, that wouldn't necessarily impact the valuation. As Avis and Young, who are our valuers, value it next year.
I don't think it's the valuation, it's the actual ongoing money's in. Is that what you're getting to? Because, yeah, the revenue
exactly,
side
our revenue, not valuation. I mean, if it's easier, perhaps a written response could be supplied if it can't be given now.
It sounds like that would be helpful, unless somebody can pick that up now. Otherwise, I do have... Are you able to assist us, Councillor Jarman?
Possibly in some measure. I think what's been said before, that this is very worthy of a conversation between you and the chair of scrutiny as a separate item for scrutiny, perhaps sooner rather than later would be the suggestion. It does seem to be quite a wide topic, and to make sure we have the right people there who can answer the right questions at that time, not to take away questions. And I think to concern this forum overly with more of that would probably not be very beneficial. I think we're kind of running into roadblocks of knowledge. One thing I would look for an assurance, though, is that following the policy changes we put forward only recently, that all of the contractual and legal work associated with these properties, now that it's being managed by the Isle of Wight Council, is processed through our own contracts team and through our own legal department and not elsewhere. And my suspicion would be that when this comes before scrutiny, you may well challenge the issue of is our business about being a property manager of mainland properties and dealing with refurbishment and those sort of things. Our experience in that is probably, I would suggest, quite weak. So I'll probably leave it there and leave it for your conversation later. Many topics are open by this.
Okay, you're not looking for a response from councillors?
No, I think it would be pointless to try and delve too more. Well, I can, though, answer the second one in why we're not looking at further investment properties, that this was a limited fund, originally targeted 100 million. That fund has now been withdrawn. We cannot borrow more against it. I would, though, clarify the statement that, well, we're not looking at further investment properties. What we are looking at doing is repositioning that investment on the Isle of Wight.
Councillor Bacon, you had further questions.
Well, I've only got one left now.
Go for it all the same.
I do very much support the proposal that this should be a formal scrutiny item, though, because I'm finding the more questions that are asked, the more concerns are coming up, frankly. Yeah. I'm sorry to have to say that, but one question I would ask, which I think is appropriate for today, I couldn't find in the papers, and that could be me, how the properties are performing in relation to what the prediction or anticipation of income was at the time of purchase. So is it possible to say, are they better than anticipated, doing roughly what was anticipated, or not as good as what was anticipated at the time of purchase?
I think that would be a question, if Claire could possibly answer that one as regards the original investment strategy and what was expected.
Thank you. I'm not sure I can answer that one, unfortunately, Graham and Chairman, but at the time of the acquisition of these properties, a full investment assessment was undertaken with a projection of the likely return on investment. I haven't been involved with the management of the portfolio for a while now, so I don't know what the current position is in that regard, but I'm sure that our accountants would happily provide you with the information as necessary to give you that overall indication. My understanding is that the portfolio as a whole continues to provide a good return on investment, and of course contributes significantly to the income needed by this local authority to manage its budget effectively.
Councillor Jarman.
Sorry, could I just say, Chairman, I would very much appreciate it if we could have that written information, if there was a projection at the time.
I think Councillor Jarman may be able to assist, but I will follow you.
I'd like to hear from the officers, because obviously Councillor Jarman wasn't a councillor at that time.
Do you have something to?
Yes, I was saying that if it, with our recommendation, it becomes an item at the Scrutiny Committee, that the original papers, which were based on the investment from 2017 and for the investments on beyond, which have the target figures in them, are made available to that item on the Scrutiny Committee. I
think that would be sensible, but I also think that we would want a note back to members of this committee on that question, and it's probably a learning curve for ourselves here on the committee, but also those who are supporting the committee through the staff side, that it might be one of those sorts of things you make a note that councillors are going to be asking for that sort of thing, so do have it in mind to place on papers beforehand. It then gets around the fact that we haven't got somebody who is able to answer straight away. I'd also say, just because we might express concern is about not being disinterested. Sometimes it doesn't mean we might be completely worried or thinking of panicking in any way. So I just want to reassure colleagues on the staff side that if we express concern, it isn't always that we are thinking something's particularly awry. We just need some extra information and extra assurance from our side of things. Of course, we may indeed have a deep worry as well. So anything else on this item? Councillor Jones-Sevens.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to really just put that recommendation forward as an outcome of this particular agenda item, if that was okay. Basically, what you said earlier, you and Councillor Stevens, about audit and Chair of Audit, the Chair of Scrutiny.
In that case, we will move to otherwise we are noting the progress, and that's one of our proposed resolutions, but the other is that we communicate to the Corporate Scrutiny Committee a request that they consider the commercial acquisition strategy at a future meeting.
And there would be a meeting held of the responsible people to formulate said agenda item.
Is that enough for you, Megan, on that? Can I put that to the...
And then the questions we put forward that are...
And indeed.
Is that what you're going to say, Councillor Bacon? No.
Your button doesn't work. I was going to say if it could be sooner rather than later, because obviously this does have a direct financial impact. I would like it going on a work programme 2 years hence.
In my informal meeting with the Chair of Corporate Scrutiny, I shall indicate the imperative nature of Audit's view on this. So with that as those two things as recommendations to note and to... Yep. So those in favour? Yes. Everybody happy on that? Good. That's unanimous. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for those who have been able to, for the questions you have been able to respond to. And I'm sure we will hear from you in due course, although our colleagues on Corporate Scrutiny seem to be the ones who will get the next pleasure of your company. Which moves us now to the Council's risk profile, item 8. That's at pages 127 and onwards in the pack. That's with the Assistant Chief Executive. Do you wish to just add anything briefly to that, or Mr. Martin?
If I may, Chair, just really to give some context again, obviously risk is something that the Council considers on an ongoing basis, and on a monthly basis we review the strategic risks that the Council considers are its most appropriate and therefore on the strategic risk register. It's always under review. So as circumstances change, both operationally within the council, but also externally, impacts on the council, the risks will be reviewed. I think it's fair to say that at this point in time, we are in a period where they need to review risks around some of the external influences on the council, in particular in relation to the system-wide workforce issue being felt by the health and social care workforce, will be something that is part of the next immediate review of the strategic risks.
Thank you for that. And I've already let members know, but formally to let them know, I had a discussion last week with yourself and others around that review of the risk register. I am pleased to see that my comment of last time has been taken on board within a sentence of key importance. Will be improving the way mitigation is presented in the report. That's not just a visual presentation, it's how it's structured, segmented, so that there's understanding of those matters which are strategic in their mitigation, operational, those things which provide information on the temperature testing of, are we about to face an increased risk side of things, or are our mitigations working, those sorts of things. Colleagues, questions? I'm sure there are some. I say I sure that, and no hands are going up on this. In which case, I'll call the Assistant Chief Executive. Is there something you wish to?
Well, only in as much as, I mean, obviously, the question of Audit Committee would be, do you consider these to be the most appropriate risks for the Council to consider as strategic risks, or are there any areas where you think there is a risk that the Council has not looked at? But also to point out that in any review, the updated report that comes to Audit will report why that change has happened and any either new mitigations that have been put in place or enhancements to existing mitigations, so that it will be very clear for you as to where the changing situation has been experienced by the Council.
What I would say to that is that I couldn't give you an answer either way as to whether it's absolutely right. One thing I'm aware as a member of the Council, of course, is the administration's bringing forward a new corporate plan later this year. And there's a close relationship between that, its KPIs, and its risks. So to some extent, anything that we might comment there, it is sort of also dependent upon what the corporate plan, what emerges within the corporate plan. My general view is that I don't think there's anything that stood out to me as missing, but I'm acutely aware that any review probably now needs to take a long horizon look at all of those risks that arise out of COVID-19, but also drilling in more those risks from that other crisis that faces us and that the Council has acknowledged and is working on, which is the climate crisis. So there may be some reshaping and indeed re-headlining of some of that risk, but that's me speculating at the moment rather more than being able to say to you, no, that this is not the right list of things at this time. Have I stimulated anybody into wishing to comment or question further? Otherwise, what is the recommendation that we approve? That I am just finding it. Sorry? This. Everything's hidden. I do apologise. So that we approve the strategic risks of the Council as set out in paragraph 12 and Appendix 1 at this time. Obviously, there's commentary that we've made already, or I have made. Councillor John.
I think we're all aware of the broad spectrum of risks that we face, and I think the issues of adult social care and the continuance of COVID, it really is across the board as an impact. I think all we can do is try to mitigate each item as we can. There are absolutely huge issues that we confront. I don't believe any of them are probably going to go away or ease in the near future. So being mindful of them is probably as far as we can go.
Councillor Stevens.
Just to touch on what's the page 132, and it's risk number 13. I see a lot of red throughout this paper, but one that I wanted to mention was achieving the vision for the island. Now we're doing a full review of the Isle of Wight risk management strategy, and we hope to be completed by December. Thereafter, we're going out to consultation. So it says here. What's the period of consultation, and when do we think that we'll be bringing this back as a completed item?
That would be to be determined, and probably take advice from the chair of this committee on where we would consult on that draft strategy and for what period. Certainly, Audit Committee, we would welcome quite detailed consultation around that strategy as we put it together. We will be reporting progress on the development of that strategy through to the chair as well.
So when the last time the strategy was reviewed, what sort of consultation was undertaken at that time?
Fairly limited, I would have thought, Chair, through Council's corporate management team.
I guess it would be worth trying to find a way if there are experts amongst our community who give a sense check of that. I'm alive to the fact that consultation allows the Audit Committee, I believe, to co-opt such a person if we were to discover such a person to assist us. So yes, Ms. Martin, if you communicate with me around that, I doubt it's something we'll take on a roadshow around the island, though. I think it might be difficult to get much excitement around the risk strategy, even though it is, of course, extraordinarily important. But otherwise, members, are you content if I put the recommendation that we approve the strategic risks at this time? Yes. So I can ask for your hands in favour. Councillor Bacon, are you? Oh, you are there. I wasn't sure. In which case that was unanimous and so approved. Which moves us on to the internal audit progress report, pages 163 and onwards. Report of the Chief Internal Auditor, who is joining us electronically. Do you wish to add anything to this briefly? Obviously, as I say, members will have read the report.
Chair, no, there isn't anything that I think needs to be flagged. The report is to portray that obviously that we are completing the work in line with the plan. There are no new significant areas of concern. However, we have provided an update in relation to the digital strategy, which is an attached appendix. Apologies that I'm not there in person. And could I just very quickly pick up on Councillor Jones-Evans's queries regarding the grants, because Wendy Pereira has kindly furnished me with the names of the two grants. And if you're happy, I will give an update regarding that particular position. So the first one was in relation to the active travel. That is the emergency active travel. It is included in this year's plan for 21-22 on the basis that there was a carryover from last year's fund. In relation to the Welcome Back Fund, I will have to confirm with internal colleagues the terms and conditions of that particular grant. It is not included currently in the audit plan. That's because not all grants do require a sign-off. And I will come back in due course. So beyond that, Chair, I had nothing else to flag to you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that.
And say thank you to Lizzie for finding and Wendy for finding that information out for me. And
excellent.
So the last summer's active travel will be included in this year's audit. Thank you.
We do have the digital strategy progress report as a separate item, and if we can, we'll take that as a separate item on the as it is on the agenda. So anything else on agenda item 9, which is the progress report at this time. Anybody wish to flag anything up on that? I would note that I found it more readable this time. I think there were some changes in. So the chair is pleased if the chair is able to read it easily enough. I don't see any hands up. Just one thing I'm aware of is, and I think I saw it elsewhere, about deprivation of liberty, that there were some flags up on the work actually being done on that, as in the day-to-day side of the work of deprivation of liberty. I note that it's pending at the moment in the audit side of things. Is there anything to be concerned about in that there seem to be other concerns around the delivery of the service there?
Councillor Garrett, to answer your question, it's too early from an audit perspective. The reason it is included in the audit plan is because it is naturally a high risk area. I am aware, and I think it is possibly because it's already flagged on the risk register. We generally encounter some issues, no matter which audit, which authority we're undertaking the work, and that's simply because of the nature of that particular activity. So I have nothing to flag to you. We will undertake the work in due course, and we will obviously report our findings to you. It's included because of the nature of it, not because I'm aware of anything else other than what is already flagged on the risk register.
Thank you, that's helpful. Colleagues, any other questions or comments on item 9? If not, then I'll put it to the committee that we note the report. I'll just take nods. Yeah, there is nodding. We have noted the report. Thank you for that. We'll move on to item 10, which is the digital strategy progress update. Colleagues who were here last time will recall this exercised us quite a bit, and we asked for this to come back to committee. So I'll kick off with you, Councillor Jones-Evans.
Thank you. Sorry, I jumped in there. Was there going to be a preamble from any staff or anyone?
Yes, I just asked Chief Internal Auditor, did you wish to add anything to this already updating report?
Chair, the only thing I think would be appropriate to flag to the committee is that we took on board the request to give a progress update, but we have to be very mindful that a number of the implementation dates that were in the agreed actions as a result of that audit would not necessarily have been achieved. So this is an interim piece of work, recognising that the client, i.e. Claire and her colleagues, would not have actioned everything because that wasn't the actual plan when we performed the first item of work.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Jones-Evans.
Thank you. And also I realise this project sits under Councillor Stephen's portfolio, but I think obviously our new website is something that works for the whole council to have sight on and take interest in. So I have pre-warned Councillor Stephens that I'll be asking some, but we're having an open debate here today, which is great. But thank you very much for last audit. You allowed me, I was sitting on the sidelines, allowed me to answer questions, and it's still a fundamental question I still haven't had the answer to, and I don't know whether the right people in the room today, and that is why the council made that decision to choose to build its own website with all of the issues that we see flagged up here before us that it brings by choosing that route to a template style that, like for instance in Braca, I think that Shropshire Council use that one, so I was looking at that over the weekend. So that's that fundamental question for me, because some of the things that those sorts of solutions provide, they cover things like the legislative side of it. They cover the security issues, and so many things. And I was just really, for me, it's a fundamental question. I've got other questions as well, but maybe I could just leave that the first one, see if anyone could answer that.
Is there someone who can, in the room or online? Yeah. You wish to answer that?
Hands up all round.
Councillor Stevens.
Chair, it's within my remit, so I've got a full written report, as you would expect, from the IT group, or indeed from the IT manager, with an evaluation of the various steps and also projections on what would have happened if we hadn't gone down a certain route. I received that last week. When I first took over the remit, I requested that, and I've requested other papers. Now, what I would suggest is that, and I'll answer all your questions, or Claire Shand will, but the thing is that we are now looking at a revised digital strategy, because I want something that's fit for purpose. I'm not saying the original one isn't, but we want something that's current and taking us forward. And it will be shared with cabinet members initially, so that we agree where we're going with it, but also the evaluation of the direction of travel with the website from the initial agreement on the direction of travel with that. But I can assure you that we've got some things there. They might not satisfy you completely, but I feel sure that what we can do is start moving on that element where there's a little bit of a question mark hanging over certain elements. But I think that I'm gradually pulling things together so that we've got the complete picture that will satisfy fellow members, and I mean that on all groups. Okay. So the actual answer to your question is, I have a paper that summarises the action and the decision-making process.
I look forward to reading that. Thank you, Councillor.
Very illuminating.
Thank you. Thank you. Just going on to a specific question now, if we could take to page 187, agreed actions about resourcing. Item number 2 on that top paragraph. Say that funding for year 2 of the project has now been approved. Now, but I do understand in the original audit that this committee saw back in June, can't remember now, June, yeah. There was I think because it was picked up that there wasn't very good project planning wasn't very robust for the project itself. And so this again is flagging up here because it says future bids for funding made as necessary. So for me, if we've got a robust project, a plan, you know what it's going to cost. I mean, that's part of the evaluation with choosing one route over another route. So now this report saying they're going to be coming back to the council for, or whoever is going to be, Councillor Jarman maybe, for more money. I don't understand.
Can you
Chair, I think that, rather than me be the catch-all for everything, and especially about finance, it's wrong for one particular member to give them an idea and a line on finance, because let's face it, the ownership of that is all of us. I'd like to defer that over to Claire Shand, if possible.
Certainly.
Thank you, Chair. And happy to respond as necessary. I think what I would like to say is that part of the remedial action in terms of the response to the audit was specifically to address the project governance arrangements. And as you rightly noted, the funding for the year 2 was approved, and the project initiation document for that period has actually now been signed off and approved, and that clarifies that we see this as being a 3-year project. and which will require a further year's specific funding to deliver the new website. That part of the documentation is currently being compiled to be considered as part of the budget setting process. As Councillor Stevens referred to, the ICT manager has prepared a very detailed report now, which sets out those initial considerations around project costs and the options through which we can make choices about the routes upon which to deliver the outcome. That very clearly sets out the lifetime costs of each of those options, and will hopefully provide some reassurance that the option chosen is well within what it would have cost us externally to source a new website.
Thank you. Can I just confirm then the document that you both talk about, Councillor Stephens and Ms Shand, is the project initiation document, the PID? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes,
Mentioned in here.
Yes, that's right. There is a project initiation document which has been clearly set out for the current year, and there is one that is in preparation for the remainder of the project. The document that Councillor Stephens refers to is a separate document which sets out the rationale for choosing to use an in-house build option and the lifetime costs that are associated with that in comparison to the other options available to the council.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I look forward to seeing both documents. Thank you, Councillor Stevens, for that. Just one more quick question for I know everyone's wanting to come in on this. But going to the executive summary, so we've got that's on page 186, the last paragraph, key gaps in documentation and governance. Going back to that original audit report that was came to committee in June, there was the risk log was flagged up as an issue, and team members didn't know there was a risk log, or B, the ones who did know about it didn't know how to use it. So can someone explain to me what's been done to that particular issue, what's been done to rectify that, please? Thank you.
Councillor Stevens, you want to jump in here? You sure you want to?
I'd love to, you know, yes, I mean, this is part of my remit. I've got no problem with any of this. It's, in actual fact, we've moved into positive territory from somewhere where we weren't, and thankfully we had internal audit to highlight where we were at a specific time. But hopefully we've moved on into more positive territory. And I wish that person would stop ringing me. Sorry, Chair. I just want to. All I want to say is that we now have adopted a template, and you know, which is the recognised throughout the authority, I believe. So we're now doing things that people can recognise. People know the pathway and the way forward. Now, prior to the audit report, as what was quite rightly pointed out, we had some lapses in certain areas, but we've now come on track with that. And I'll bring Claire Shand back in, but to my mind and to my knowledge, we've ironed out that, and we're working to a better standard and a better place. Claire, would you like to come back in?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Councillor Stevens. And as you say, part of the issue that we had with that particular audit point that was made was that we were utilising an alternative IT system for the purposes of project documentation, which we discovered that not all the project staff had direct access to. So in remedy to that particular action, we are now utilising all of the corporately agreed templates, including the risk log, for the purposes of our project management. That risk register is reviewed at our weekly board meetings, and every single member of staff within the project team have been made aware of the risk register and how they might be able to add or comment or raise any issues with regards to the risks that are logged within them. Each of the project teams, the two distinct project teams, that's both the digital content and the software development side of things, have also got weekly team meetings at which any matters of risk are also discussed.
So, I'm hearing music off.
That was me, sorry.
Okay. So, there are a couple of questions that kind of in my own mind. Is one, and I think we need to see this document that Councillor Stevens has spoken about, amongst other things, to understand how a project is initiated, which, on the reading of the words, all the funding was not yet in place for something that is so crucial for the council to be able to deliver. I have a mental image of what is that bridge that's halfway built across a canyon. I hope we're not building a website that, if we were to pull the plug on some bits of the funding, or it wasn't to get that funding, that we would have a largely unfunctional website. That's a bit rhetorical at the moment. More broadly, I think there are some issues here that worry me about how is it that somewhere can start using some non-standard, non-authority approved software, and how do we just be assured now that that cannot happen again? So can somebody give me an assurance that it must be at CMT level, I guess, that message is absolutely be driven home. You do not use anything that's not been ticked off as appropriate for the authority's use. Is that with you?
If I may, Chair, I mean, I think you've got to the nub of the rationale for audit, really, and the importance of audit to local authorities. So two things there. I mean, the earlier agenda item that you discussed around the review of the risk framework, I think it's quite right for audit, particularly in informing the development of that framework, to consider how that framework is communicated out and how we do monitor that that framework is being used more proactively than is currently happening with the existing framework. So there may be some issues around what's included in it and how it's developed to make it easy to use and easy to understand. And I think more importantly, our internal audit plays a really key role in helping us to understand that our internal processes are being complied with. That is the role of audit. It's to give us that reassurance and assurance that that is the case. And where we find that there are issues being raised, that we do move to rectify those as soon as possible. So I think hand in hand with a review of risk assurance process, but also internal audit to help us scrutinise the way we deliver is exactly the route that we have in place to ensure that this does happen across the council.
I did see a couple of hands. Councillor Jarman, and then I believe Councillor Stevens. Councillor Jarman, and then Councillor Jones Evans.
Chair, I feel very concerned. If I turn first of all to exception 6 on the document, exception 6 talks about stakeholder engagement plan. I assume this is actually talking to the people who will be using this website at the end of the day and providing a needs analysis from them about what they actually want. I've never actually seen a needs analysis yet for what the project is supposed to deliver. That would be my first question. Is there a requirements document for it? And what level of engagement with the primary users of the website, which is undoubtedly the public, has actually taken place? The second one would be that I assume, as a second part to that question, that the needs analysis has been fed into the comparative analysis which has been provided to Councillor Stevens of the options for the way forward regarding a website for the council. And I very much look forward to seeing that document as well, the comparative analysis for the ways forward. And then I would assume that bringing that before Cabinet, where a Cabinet decision on the way forward would be taken, would itself approve the funds to take that route. And I would suggest it would be extremely unwise, to use your analogy, to continue building a bridge over a canyon where we have not yet chosen the nature of the bridge or even seen the paper that defines the needs which it has to address. So I'm feeling very cautious on this. We've been discussing this point for 3 months now, and I think the needs analysis, number 1, the comparative analysis for the way to address that need, number 2, and the agreement of that way forward and the funding of it, number 3, would be a reasonable sequence to make those agreements in.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. Councillor Stevens.
Councillor Jarman, you adequately summed up the steps that should be taken with any project. Going back a while, prior to me taking over this remit, decisions were made at full council, not by but across chamber, in the last term. Whoever voted in whatever way, decisions were made on financing and putting forward a new website. And I dare say there's a paper there with with various activities and what was set out. We are in danger here of going back and scrutinising the council decision from a previous administration in a previous term. Now, the legalities of that, I don't know. But I would say that we would have to look into that if we're going to, and I'm talking about constitutional effect and indeed the legalities of moving it forward. If we've already agreed at full council that we're going to have a website, and I was not involved in that, but if we were going to have a website, someone's made a decision to have a website, and it could have been the last administration. All I'd say is that I want to go back and look at that, but you must bear in mind that what was agreed, and what we've got to do is to look at where we are, what's been agreed at corporate management team already to fund the next area, without, and I take on board fully what you say, but to be quite candid, we can't suspend because we have a lot of things going on here. If the corporate management team is, and that's the way this local authority is run, corporate management agree to move it forward because they've been given the information. Originally, there was a decision made by members. Now it's been supported by a corporate management team, and we're going forward. And really, what we've got to look at is, okay, if we want to look at how we've got it, put it into scrutiny. Give it to the role of scrutiny, not audit, because we're looking back. Well, I don't know how long ago. I mean, perhaps Claire Shand can tell me when the decision was made at full council. But we've gone down this route. The buses left the station. We're quite right to keep a grip on what's happening and where we're going and what we're doing. But we can't. Once the decision's been made, as long as the correct guidelines and legal aspects have been taken forward, down to our constitution, down to the areas of remit and our structure, I can't see that we can stop in mid-project. And as I said, they're going back. I've gone back through, or we've gone back through. We've got the decision-making process in the written word, which will be presented to you. And I feel that as far as I can see, you know, the only way we can look into the whys and wherefores of what happened with the decision-making process to have a new website and whether we've gone down the right route is to put it to corporate scrutiny and let them look at it. I'm not trying to push more onto corporate scrutiny, but I'm going to leave it at that.
I am beginning to wonder at what point we've moved from audit to scrutiny. And
exactly.
But what would concern me from an audit perspective and the whole value for money side of things is the danger of entering into a kind of a sunk cost fallacy that we keep throwing money at something. I've had one analogy with a canyon. I'm now reminded of Lady Macbeth and talking to her husband about his discussion of how far across a river of blood one should go, or one should turn back. I'll stop dredging things out of my analogies there. Councillor Jones-Evans and then Councillor Peace. Or did you wish to?
Yes. Sorry, Chair, I didn't get an answer to the first one. The first part of the question was about the public consultation for the needs of the new website.
Oh, right, yes.
I have no information on that whatsoever, and I would like clarification on that.
Councillor Peace, you can answer that.
I've never seen the document.
But we will ask officers if they wish to add something to that. Councillor Peace, do.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Stevens. What I can say is I was the portfolio holder prior to Councillor Stevens. There was an extensive and long-winding consultation that went ahead with all stakeholders, users, council members, officers. And that was a very thorough job, and I've got full support in Claire Shand and her staff in the work that they did. I really don't think there is any need to push this towards scrutiny. I can assure this audit committee that work was thorough and it was well thought out and documented. No, I'm talking about the website.
But there is indeed under exception 6 a discussion of scheduling and completing consultation.
And that's where Councillor Jarman's original question came from. It was around stakeholder engagement.
So could we have a copy of the requirements analysis from that stakeholder discussion? Does it exist? Or?
I'm sure Claire Shand can help out with that.
Okay, Shand, are you able to assist us on that? Yes.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chair. I think there's a number of things for consideration here. In that, I think there's 2 aspects to what Councillor Jarman is suggesting here in terms of his question. So Councillor Peace has indicated that at the initiation of the project, a needs analysis was undertaken, and I think it would be right to say that the key driving force about a new website is that we now have accessibility legislation that the local authority must meet. Our current website is unable to meet those requirements, so doing nothing was never going to be an option. And so it was, that was the critical starting point for the project itself. Councillor Peace is right that we undertook a significant amount of consultation with our staff, with councillors at the time, and users of the service to help inform those initial considerations. I'm more than happy to provide the information available to us at that particular time. Now, in terms of the scope of the project, as Councillor Jones-Evans has identified in her questions, that there is a project initiation document which records some of those specific needs and requirements of the project. And again, I'm happy to make that available to committee members for assurance around the scope of the work and the resources that are required to complete the work contained within it. But just to answer Councillor Jarman's other question around the audit action, which stipulated that the stakeholder engagement plan at the time of the audit was not complete or had sufficient information contained within it to give them assurance that the stakeholder element of the project was sufficiently robust. That engagement strategy has now been approved by the project board and contains a very clear programme of activities that we will be undertaking and have already begun to undertake with regards to the people that we need to test the development of that website with. And that will include young people, they include older people, and we have a specific link with Age UK as part of our age friendly initiative. It will include staff, it will include councillors and a wide variety of other people and customers who will be utilising the new website. That will help us to continue to shape and refine the website look and feel as we go through the project. I think it's important to also perhaps say that the website will never really be a finished product, because we always have to take into account that there will be feedback and things that we need to continuously improve as we go forward. So I hope that answers some of the questions that have been raised, but more than happy to add any additional information if that's of benefit to committee members. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor John.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, I'm very happy to take a look at that requirement document as soon as it can be made available, and the comparative analysis of the way forwards, what options we've got from Councillor Stevens. And as soon as they're available, the better, I think, because we don't want to continue down a path that we may or may not change. I'm not saying we will, I'm just saying we don't know. And it's the not knowing that gives me the concern. So as soon as those documents for the requirements, because I would imagine this is probably going to be the primary mode in the future of access to the website. So we need to make sure that everything is mobile enabled from the beginning, and the options paper, as soon as they can be made available, please.
My feeling is that we're not going to bottom this out completely at this meeting, but we also should just sort of then say, well, we'll circulate some information, then kick this off, and then it feels that it's kicked off into the long grass. I think there's a discussion to be had from an audit perspective, a scrutiny perspective, and a cabinet perspective as to what it is that we want to achieve out of this. One, we do want to deliver a website that works and works well and works in the right way, but also to understand internal audit has identified weaknesses, how those weaknesses came about so that they cannot come about again. So I don't necessarily want to just bring things to a close here, but I feel there is a need to, unless there are one or two points.
Risk question I need to ask, if I may. So going up to the top of that, the exceptions, exception 2 regarding the recruitment. Now, this may since this report's been written, this may have been sorted and happy days, but because we are building our own website, the vacancy in the software development team, which we've been unable to recruit to at the time of writing this paper, this is being managed as a risk, and it's quite a big risk, isn't it? Obviously, for delivery, it's pretty. If you're building your own, then but hopefully, Councillor is going to say that role's now been filled, and all happy days. But coming, so that's great, fantastic, great, brilliant tip. So my last question was, talk about the project board, say it meets weekly. Now, this is our front door. This is really, really important, how people are accessing services, accessing information, accessing their council. It's about democracy, about everything we do as a council. It's so important. And it's been given an open-ended budget requirement, it would seem, as well. I'm just sort of, now, we need to learn from other projects, big projects. Now, I'm not saying financially this is as big as the floating bridge, but it's probably actually more important, if you like. And I think one of the things we did learn from the floating bridge was that there should have been a members board over with this. And I don't know if there's actually members involved in this project board, because I also don't, if there's only one member there, I don't think it's fair to put it on just one person's shoulders. Such a big project. If there are so many inherent risks in it. So that's just my parting salvo, really. But I just think it's really important that we think of it as a big project for the council.
Are there points you feel you want responded to now, or can we take it the way I've suggested? I think there is a discussion to be had between audit, scrutiny and cabinet to try to bottom out exactly what we want to achieve collectively on this. Wendy.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a reminder, really, that Lizzie, when she started the discussion, made reference to the fact that the update that you've got before you is not the full audit update, that it's a partial update and taken at a point in time prior to when they were planning to do their update to you. So, as a matter of course, there will be the completed audit update coming back to this committee in any case. And I think the important thing for you as a committee to remember is that your role outside of that value for money question, which you quite rightly asked, is around, are the assurance processes and the governance processes that the council as a corporate body has in place being adhered to for the delivery of this project? That's not to say that there aren't other conversations that should happen elsewhere, but this committee needs to fulfil its role to enable us to learn properly from the delivery of projects of the council. And I think the other point to remember is that there is a budget in place for this project. There will be a website delivered by the end of March 2022. The budget setting process that the council is about to go through, which will be discussed cabinet and full council, is the route through which the discussions about future budget requirements will happen. And I think you have a governance process in place to lead this project forward as well in terms of cabinet decisions, council budget decisions, and then operationally at a board level, you should be able to have assurance that the processes and procedures to deliver the project are being met in the right way.
That's a very helpful summary. When are we due then to, the Chief Internal Auditor can probably tell me, when would next reporting to us on this be due?
Well, I will ask Grant whether he knows off the top of his head the last implementation date, because it would not be appropriate for us to conclude anything until we have gone past that implementation date. So Grant, sorry to put you on the spot, but are you able to confirm, please?
No. I had in mind to do the follow-up on this, or we had in mind to do the proper follow-up on this in December time. So you'd get something in the first committee meeting after Christmas. But I'm fairly certain that some of the implementation dates were up till March, up to the end of the year. So we can flex when internal audit does that piece of follow-up work. At the moment, I had in mind December, but it's not going to capture all the actions.
But you might be reporting something to us in December, or not reporting to us formally until.
I think that's sort of be to confirm provisionally. It was sort of scheduled. The field was sort of scheduled December time, but if we do it in December, I don't think all the actions will be complete in December.
Councillor Jarman, and then I think I'll try to wrap this.
Yes, Chair. I wonder if we could ask you in your conversation with the Chair of Scrutiny to discuss this. And once you've had that discussion, which you said was this week, to come back to us and in fairly short order, I'd suspect, with some suggestions for a way forward. And you may want to talk to Councillor Stevens and other people who are here today on that. We do have a series of financial discussions going on at the moment about line item vetoing of things which are partly underway and indeed things which have not yet started. And so there is an opportunity to manage this in a number of ways. But before we take any steps, I think it would be worth hearing the results of your conversation, perhaps within, let's say, 10 days. Would that be reasonable? If we can, we give the chair an action here.
The chair is very happy to have that discussion.
Thank you.
And as I've said, there are at least 3 functions here: audit, cabinet, and scrutiny, all involved. Ultimately, to deliver for the collective body, which is the local authority. There are issues here. Not everybody is content, as we can tell around this table. But I am mindful of what the Assistant Chief Executive has reminded us of the role of audit in this compared to other parts of the council. But just because we've got that role shouldn't mean that we shouldn't highlight issues of concern, even if they're not quite within our remit. Members, are you content that we note at this stage and take an assurance from me that I will be having that discussion with the corporate scrutiny chair, but also try to have those discussions as well with cabinet members as well. See if we can bottom out something that means we all move together. Are you content with that? I shall take silence as contentment. In which case, we've noted this report. Thank you for that. And thank you for bearing with us on our discussion there on that. The final item is members' question time. Do any members have a question? No, you don't. Are you sure, Councillor Stevenson? No. In which case, I'll close the meeting.
Chair.
Oh, is there something I've missed?
Sorry, Chair. And I'd popped my hand up, attempting to get someone's attention.
Okay. I don't see it.
No, do not worry. Do not worry. What I wanted to also just finally add in relation to the digital is, I think, whilst audit attempts not to be a pressure on any service when we're auditing them, we need to be careful, I think. And I'm not clear whether you're expecting us to do any final pieces of work. I would certainly encourage that from an audit perspective, we are certainly in full support that things are moving in the right direction, taking on board all of the elements and the questions that have been raised. I don't think it would be appropriate for us to do any work around the December time. If we are going to do any work, I think we should do it later on in the new year, and potentially look towards the tail end of Q4, because we need to be mindful that we do not put, i.e. internal audit, an additional pressure on the resources that are attempting to move this project forward in a positive direction. So I'm ever so sorry, but I am unclear whether the committee is requesting us to do something. And if you are requesting internal audit to do anything, can I suggest that it is not until the end of the financial year?
My question earlier was more, when would you be bringing something to us? And Mr. Newton responded, considering December and things like that. But the reporting side of things, that I think you can be assured we're not asking anything extra of you. It's just if there are opportunities for us to see things.
Which I was a bit confused, because I thought that you're looking at going back to relook at the audit or finish the audit when because there was a plan, wasn't there, of when things were going to be done by, and you were going to go by then. But you're saying now you're going to accept there's slippage on this project. Is that what I'm hearing? And then you're going to look at it after.
I don't think.
I was going to come in. When we follow up, we try and do it at a point where the majority of the actions are complete. Now, the best will in the world, that isn't always possible. So we'll do it as close to the end of all the actions being completed as possible. And then we will come to a review on assurance we can offer at that point. So if there's sufficient evidence to support a view that you can be confident that these actions are going to be seen through, then would raise the assurance level. Now, December would capture most of them, but there's obviously Liz's point, we don't have to put additional pressure onto the team who are delivering the revised website. If we were to do schedule the field work towards the end of Q4, so sort of March time, the vast bulk of the actions should be complete. In terms of reporting to committee, that does mean that the update from internal audit, which would offer a revised assurance opinion based on the outcome of the field work we do and where the actions are up to, wouldn't then go to committee till, I think it's normally around April time, April, May time. So, well, yeah, or June. So
what I would say here, there's a point where audit work moves forwards like that, but it's then incumbent on those cabinet members who are on the other side of things to be looking at things. Yeah, somebody on the screen I'm being directed to, whether it's Claire or Elizabeth.
Sorry, Chair, it's Claire Shand here. If it helps at all, given the committee's understandable desire to receive clear assurance that the project is back on track in accordance with the assurance framework, I wouldn't be averse to the follow-up audit being undertaken in December so that you have an earlier opinion presented to you on the position of the project, if that helps.
I'll look to the auditing side of things first.
I'll be led by my
We're happy with that, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Jarman then.
Yes, Chair. I don't think we're looking necessarily for assurance that it's back on track. I think what we're looking for is assurance that the requirements are what we want, that we have the options analysis and that we choose the right option. That is the next choice before us, choosing the right option for the way forward. So we're waiting to see those papers.
Are we straying beyond committee's function? I don't think we're now in audit committee's remit on this. And I think that's something that has to be bottomed out either through cabinet, because that's where the executive function lies, supported by whatever audit committee's opinions and comments have been, but also anything that you may either take from corporate scrutiny because it picks it up itself, or you request of scrutiny to ask to look at it. And I don't, it's not for me to tell the cabinet, but I'd actually say here's a chance for cabinet to ask scrutiny to do some work for them rather than wait for them to do that. But by all means, I'm going to be having a discussion later. But I think I'm going to have to close it on this because this has gone beyond where audit lies, and I think there's a danger in that. If lots of nods, thank you. Also, maybe time pressure is helping as well. But it's serious. That the very fact of our discussion today shows that there are serious concerns, and this is one of those times where I say concern means worry. So as an organisation and as a political body of politicians, councillors, elected representatives, we do have to bottom this out one way or another. So can I return this to members' questions? In that time, did anybody come up with a question? Otherwise, I will close the meeting at 12:17. Thank you very much indeed.